A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Coming up on the program today, we're going to talk about the arrest of some 8 armed protesters in Odessa, Texas. They were out supporting the reopening of a local bar there, opening in spite of Governor Abbott's stay-at-home orders. The 8 arrested by the Ector County Sheriff, although he says it wasn't because they were exercising their Second Amendment rights. He says it was because they were violating the Texas ABC laws. Meanwhile, the unofficial spokesman for the group says that they are now going to be pursuing this case in court. We'll get to that in just a moment or two. Before we talk about that, though, we need to talk about something else that's going on. That would be some of the shortages that we're starting to see at the grocery stores, not just for things like toilet paper, paper towels, hand sanitizer. I'm trying to think of some of the other things that I've had trouble finding over the past couple of weeks in the grocery stores. Now it's getting to proteins. Now it's getting to meat and chicken and pork. And there are concerns that these shortages, which are sporadic, maybe regionally based, but there are concerns that these shortages could persist for quite some time. Gabby Hoffman is a Second Amendment advocate. She is also the host of the District of Conservation podcast, focusing on hunting and fishing. And she joins us on the program to talk about whether or not more Americans are going to be turning to hunting and fishing to help put food on their table. Take a look and listen. Gabby, thanks so much for coming on the program. It's good to talk with you today.
It's good to be back on. Thank you for having me, Cam.
Absolutely. I appreciate you, like getting dressed up and stuff. And how are you dealing with the coronavirus shutdown?
It has taken a little bit toll on my business, but I'm managing okay. I worry for some of our friends throughout the Commonwealth who are suffering a lot more and are possibly weighing having to close their businesses. So I'm counting my blessings, but it's hit everyone. A lot of my family, my dad has less work and all that, but it's not the worst. But I worry for those who have brick and mortar shops, restaurants, and that sort. So it could be a lot worse, but counting my blessings. Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that you're doing okay. And you're right. Everybody has been impacted, whether it's, they've lost their job, they've had to take a cut in pay. They're wondering, even if everything is going fine, even if your business is strong and your business is good, if you go to the grocery store, you're probably scratching your head. Okay, when's the toilet paper coming back? What happened to all the chicken? Where's the meat going? We're now seeing these stories about shutdowns of meat processors. I saw a story Monday or Tuesday, I think it was. Wendy's, the fast food restaurant, about 20% of their restaurants are out of beef. Because they don't use frozen beef, and so their supply lines have been hit a little bit harder and a little bit sooner than what might be coming for other businesses due to these processing plant closures. And the flip side of that, Gabby, is that more Americans, it looks like, are now either going back to the field or they're taking to the field for the first time. They're looking at hunting as a means of sustenance, as a means of providing food for their families. Yeah, I haven't really seen documentation yet, but I keep hearing from people that, maybe it's time I consider other options, especially with these disruptions to the supply chain. And especially in our region, in the Delmarva, the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia region, that whole chicken supply has been extremely disrupted. And just hearing about the meat shortages should concern everyone, regardless if you live here or Iowa or some part of the country that is affected by this. And I think the companies that own about 80% of the share of production, they want to price gouge and make meat a lot more expensive when the price of cattle is demonstrably lower. So people are like, well, if I'm being ripped off on the price of beef and there's all these shortages, maybe I should look into maybe getting more organically sourced meat. Provided that it's the right season. I think turkey season is about to finish. I haven't been able to go out to the field just because I'm worried about whether or not I would violate certain rules. And also the public land or private land access I would have is about 2 hours away. I'm just playing it safe then, in that case. But deer season is not until until November, October. I think it's November for us here in Virginia. We don't rifle season, excuse me, but you can begin archery in September. So people are going to have to wait for most, unless they do predator hunting or trapping for beavers. There are a lot of options you can find to source your meat. And I'm going to be weighing my options to do that myself when I'm able to get back into the field. But yes, I think people are looking, especially when it comes to hunting, but also for fishing. There's a lot of reports coming out, initial reports about how people are perceiving outdoor activities during the pandemic. And fishing, online searches for fishing and how to fish in the coronavirus have skyrocketed. According to the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, which runs a project called takemefishing.org, they've said they've seen an uptick in traffic about people learning how to get their licenses, how-to videos. And I think they had 350% increase in searches for how-to videos, how to go fishing, how to rig your rod, how to do this. And I think 24% of adults polled in this new Harris poll that the fishing industry has touted have said that parents with kids under the age of 18 want to find more ways to go fishing in this coronavirus pandemic. So even with fishing, because people should eat fish if they're allowed to, and if it's really good, I recommend eating salmon. I think salmon steelhead season in much of the country will be going on, the spring salmon run, I should say, will be going on until like the end of April. But now we're in May. So maybe most of the season has kind of subsided, but you can, I think, still fish for some steelhead, or trout or something of that other. I think trout season in Virginia runs till the end of May. But you can even eat catfish and other types of species. So you can find aquatic species to consume, especially fish, and land creatures as well, depending upon the season. But I think people are kind of going back to your original point. They are looking for other ways to obtain protein sources, and you're going to see, I think, more of an interest in hunting and fishing going forward. Hopefully, that's my hope.
Yeah, I hope so as well. And I do have a couple of figures for you. This is from the New York Post. They say that Indiana, there's been a 28% increase in turkey hunting license sales during the first week of the season. They also say that game and fish agencies in Minnesota, New Mexico, and other states have seen an increase in either hunting license sales or in permit applications. And you know, it's interesting because I think a lot of people who maybe aren't hunters just think, well, that's the fall thing, right? That's you know, you go out and you hunt deer in the fall, but no, I mean, there are actually seasons all year round for different species in many states. In Virginia, again, we've got the spring turkey season going on right now. I wouldn't necessarily say that turkey hunting is where I would start hunting if I've never hunted before. I mean, that's you know, that's a challenge. I have friends who are lifelong turkey hunters, and you know, quite often their hunt turns into a beautiful day in the woods, but they don't come back with a big old tom. So what would be your, because I know this is something that is near and dear to your heart. You have with your podcast, District of Conservation, you've written extensively about hunting and fishing with your dad and the bonds that you guys have shared. Where would you suggest that people start? I mean, should they start with a rod and reel and you know, go to a local lake or a local pond? And if they're interested in hunting, what's a good way to dip your toe into the water if you've never done this before?
Those are excellent questions, and I'm happy to offer my take on that. And as you know, I've been fishing for most of my life, and I've just dipped into hunting about 3-4 years ago more seriously. And with respect to what activity to start with, I think if you're just an evergreen consumer of outdoor activities, or I should say a green user, and you've never done it before, I would say fishing is the best gateway activity to be introduced to shooting sports and hunting. And that's what it was for me. I can't say that for everyone. Some people may pick up, let's say, upland bird hunting first. And that was the first type of hunting I did because it was easier to control. You have guides helping you, you have dogs flushing for the birds. And it's a lot more easier to learn how to hunt with such a, I would say, more simple hunting process. It's not the easiest type of hunting to do, but upland bird hunting is an easy, I would say, introductory into that because the bird is a lot smaller. You're not chasing bigger animals, and you'd be mighty ambitious to want to pursue an elk or a deer if it's your first time hunting. But I would say starting off with smaller game, especially upland birds, or if you're doing predator hunting, if you're comfortable, let's say, culling the numbers of coyotes. And you can do a lot of predator hunting year round, as long as your state hasn't shut off opportunities to do that yet. But you can do squirrel hunting. That's also very simple. I haven't done that because I'm kind of skeptical of eating squirrel. But squirrel hunting is quite popular here in Virginia and even in Kentucky and much of Appalachia. Like I said, small game is great. Upland birds, I would say, are good to start. And that's what I did when I started hunting about 4 years ago.
Okay. Squirrel's not bad. Wouldn't be my first choice. Like if I went to a restaurant and they had steak and squirrel on the menu, I'd probably go with the steak. But again, we're talking about, in a pinch. And that's the thing. I mean, in a pinch, you can eat possum. You can eat a squirrel. You can eat a lot of things that you might not. Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. That you might not choose to eat. But if it's a matter of putting food on the table, all of a sudden your options, are a lot more wide open. I don't think I'd eat a coyote. But, I guess if I got hungry enough, I would. But that'd probably be
jerky before.
Way down. You've had coyote jerky?
I have. My friend Jeremiah Doty, who is a wild game chef, has given me both coyote and beaver jerky to try at SHOT Show a few years ago. And I hate to admit it, it was actually really good.
Okay. That makes me feel better about coyotes then.
It's not my first choice of eating, but I'm adventurous when it comes to expanding my food palette. So
that's awesome. Now, beaver, I've heard that beaver's pretty gamey with the exception of the tail. I've heard that the tail is what you want to eat.
Yes. I don't know what cut of the beaver he fed us with this beef jerky, but it was really good. I can't complain.
Huh. All right. Now, one of the other questions would be access, right? So let's say you've decided, all right, I want to go out on the hunt or I want to go fishing. Where do I go? That's another, big question that a lot of folks are going to face because you basically have two options. You can find somebody who has private land that you can hunt on. If you're lucky enough to have land yourself that you can hunt on, well, I guess that answers that question. But what sort of, is public hunting and public fishing, is that a viable option for people?
Yes, I would say access can be really challenging and it depends on the region you live in. As many of your listeners and viewers know, out west, very public land dominated. I think 95% of public land is concentrated out west. And here on the East Coast, we don't have much of public land access for hunting opportunities. I think in Virginia, it's about 16% of the state is open to opportunities to go hunting. It's not as bad as, let's say, Maryland or Texas, but it's still kind of meager. But when it comes to wanting to access private land for hunting, it's actually not that impossible when you have avenues like Outdoor Access, which is a great private company based in Richmond, Virginia. I've talked a lot about them. I've gotten to know their staff. I've been a member for a few years. And they're trying to offer private industry, free enterprise solutions to navigate the challenges of private land hunting access. And they've really taken off over the years and been offering people across Virginia, and they've expanded to North Carolina and Pennsylvania to help people address those difficult access issues when it comes to hunting land. When it comes to fishing, actually, it's a lot more accessible to fish on public waters. Here in Virginia, we really have no shortage of that right now. Some bodies of water may be closed. I know county parks are closed, like one lake that I love to frequent and that I really want to go to because I learned that they have a great muskie fishery here in Fairfax County, Burke Lake. It's closed right now until coronavirus restrictions are lifted. But certain public waterways are still opened. I know that public waterways in national parks, in the Shenandoah Park, is closed right now until restrictions are lifted. But it's not that challenging to access a public waterway. When it comes to public land, however, for hunting, it's a lot more challenging. But it's not impossible when it comes to, let's say, duck hunting. There are a lot of wildlife management areas where you can go duck hunting all over the state, so it's not that impossible. You just have to check your state wildlife agency to see what is around you if you're unsure. I always recommend people check the Virginia Game and Department of Inland Fisheries is a great resource. They're pretty good. They haven't had too many closures of public fishing and or hunting opportunities. You can still hunt all the while practicing social distancing. And every other state in the union has a guide to that on what is closed, what is not closed, what people can do, how to obtain their license. And the source I'd mentioned before, Take Me Fishing, is a great resource to pull up information on where to go fishing, where to go boating, how to procure a license, and just to discover bodies of water around you. And there are so many bodies of water for fishing. Like I said, I think fishing is a little easier for someone who is green to hunting, fishing, shooting sports, kind of the outdoor industry, because you can find a body of water in Central Park, you can fish Central Park, permitted that it is not closed down right now. Or you can fish on the Potomac River. There are a lot of little lakes in Alexandria, Virginia, the city that I live in. Right outside of Old Town Alexandria, there's Lake Cook, and they stock it with trout every fall and spring. So you can even fish something as simple as that, or the river, or the ocean. I know Ocean City, Maryland is opening this weekend, which is interesting because they're on an indefinite lockdown. But even states where you don't think you can go fishing and hunting, especially fishing in the time of the coronavirus, you certainly can. You just have to be aware of the rules and follow all the guidelines so you maximize your time outdoors. And people should know that it's inherent among anglers and hunters that we are practicing social distancing, because you don't want to be too close to another angler because your line could get caught. You could snag a line. You could accidentally prick them with your hook. Who knows what can happen? But people naturally practice these social distancing measures. So it's not anything that they have to adjust differently to the rules. Just being more aware and trying to avoid crowds.
Very good advice. And we should also mention as well, you've talked about getting your hunting license. It's very important you follow all of the laws of your state, whether that is, taking your hunter safety course, getting your license. You don't want to end up getting arrested for poaching if you're just trying to put food on the table for your family. So you need to go about this the right way. And again, check with your local or your state Department of Game and Fisheries or whatever your local state wildlife agency is. They'll have information on how you can obtain your hunter safety course. I'm curious. You talked about outdoor access, and I think it's a great idea to help folks find private land where they can hunt. Do you know of any programs, Gabby, that offer mentorships? Some of us might be lucky enough to be able to reach out to a friend or family member and say, hey, I know you hunt. I've never hunted before, but I'm interested. Can you take me? Can you show me? But what about those folks who don't have anybody in their life who has experience hunting? Are there programs out there to partner those first-time hunters with more experienced hunters?
Yes, there are actually several, and I'll do my best to break them down for you. There is a greater initiative called the R3 movement, and so it's a association of wildlife biologists, communications experts, and others who kind of are plugged into the industry. And there are R3 initiative positions that are in most states across the country. So they're being tasked with recruitment, retention, and reactivation. So if you, let's say, go to your state wildlife agency website, you're wanting to find mentorship programs, and you see the contact information of someone like an R3 mentor or kind of position, you can reach out to them. A lot of state wildlife agencies have women in the outdoors programs. There are a lot of mentorship programs and links that are also included in state wildlife agencies. There are also a lot of private efforts to encourage mentorship with new hunters. The National Shooting Sports Foundation has their 1+ movement, where they encourage seasoned hunters to take out newbies into the field. So I definitely recommend people looking into that and seeing how to find mentors through that. And that's through their Let's Go Hunting initiative and project. So if you type in Let's Go Hunting NSSF Google search, you'll be able to find it, no problem. And then just simply asking people, you could do a query, a Google search, or you can ask people on social media and say, I'm new to hunting. I want to learn how to do it. Who can connect me to a mentor? So just simply having a call to action on social media can help you land connections to people who can take you out hunting.
Those are some fantastic ideas and tips, Gabby. Thank you so much for coming on the program. It is always good to get a chance to catch up with you. I hope at some point we get to do this. I know that you and I have talked about fishing the James River before, and maybe we can socially distance here this spring and get out and do some fishing.
I would love to do that, and we'll make a point to do that. I have no doubt once this blows over. And thank you so much for having me on to talk about these basics and tips for people to maximize their time.
Absolutely. And listen, if folks want to check out the District of Conservation podcast, which is fantastic, you absolutely should be listening to this. How do they find it online?
Yeah, they can go to just type in District of Conservation podcast. Pretty easy. It's populated the Google search results, so you shouldn't have a problem finding it. But if you have a preferred podcast platform, Apple shares and distributes the podcast. We're also on Anchor.fm, Google Play, Spotify, and 18 different platforms. So you can't miss us. And we just had a few wonderful guests. I had Katie Pavlich a few weeks ago. She's obviously a known fixture here at Town Hall and all that. I had a fly fishing guide out of Arlington, Virginia. And I just spoke to Diana Muller of the DC Project, who is doing a phenomenal job getting women to promote advocacy efforts for Second Amendment issues in their state legislatures and also federally in Congress. So we've had a lot of exciting guests on the podcast, and I encourage your viewers and listeners to check it out and give us a shot.
Absolutely. Gabby Hoffman, thanks so much for being on Bearing Arms Cam and Company. We'll do this again soon.
Yes, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Appreciate Gabby joining us on the program. Before we get to our Armed Citizen Story of the Day, our recidivist report, our good deed of the day, we do need to talk a little bit about what happened in West Texas, where, again, the Ector County Sheriff's Office called out on Monday to a bar called Big Daddy Zane's in Odessa, Texas, that was reopening in spite of Governor Abbott's shutdown order. And there were approximately 20 individuals associated with a group called Open Texas that were outside of the bar. They say that they were standing not on the bar's property, but on the bar owner's private property. Some of them anyway, were armed. Some were not. And the sheriff's office rolls up, the SWAT team from the sheriff's office rolls up, armored personnel carrier. The deputies come out, their guns are out, hands go up. 8 people ended up being arrested by the sheriff's office for violating the Texas ABC laws, the alcohol beverage control laws that prohibit the carrying of firearms on the premise. I got to tell you, watching this video, I keep going back and forth. Like I see gun owners doing some things that I think aren't so smart, even if they're legal. I wrote about this, about the armed protesters in Michigan at the state capitol. And now you've got lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, by the way, who are now talking about banning the carrying of firearms inside the state capitol. And then I watched the video from Ector County, Texas, and I saw the APC roll up, and the news cameras are there. The deputies come out, and I just thought to myself, well, that was dumb. That was really dumb. Even if the laws were being violated, because I want to go back here and talk about a press conference held yesterday, Tuesday, in Ector County, where the sheriff, Mike Griffiths, laid out why these arrests were made. And he said that the premises under the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission Code is any property controlled by this person. He said all of this property out there belongs to that lady. See, again, the Open Texas folks had said, well, we weren't on the property of the bar. We were on her private property. And what was interesting is one of the members of Open Texas was actually at this press conference, got a chance to directly ask the sheriff about this. Guy named Philip Archibald. He was not arrested because he was not armed on Monday's protest. And he asked Sheriff Griffiths, he said, what about Penal Code 46.035 that states that the premises is the building and not the surrounding property, parking lots, or anything else? In other words, he thinks they were legal. If they had been in the bar, it would have been one thing, but in the parking lot, it was something else entirely. Sheriff Griffiths replied, look, the premises, he read from the TABC code, saying that the premises are the grounds in all buildings, vehicles, and appurtenances. I've never actually used that word before. Pertaining to the grounds, including any adjacent premises, if they are directly or indirectly under control of the same person. Now, Archibald said, we're not breaking any laws. We're making sure that we're 100% within the laws. He said, we did not get arrested in Dallas, didn't get arrested in Houston or anywhere else, but we're going to continue helping businesses open up regardless of whether or not that's against the governor's executive order, because that order is unconstitutional. Okay. So it sounds like if the Open Texas group had been, let's say, out on the sidewalk, there would have been an issue, right? Public right of way, as opposed to the premises where the alcoholic beverage license is set up. Having said that, this does seem like a huge overreach on the part of the sheriff to send out the SWAT team and the armored personnel carrier. The sheriff talked about how, he would not have reacted or responded the way that he did had the bar owner simply been more low-key about opening. He said, why draw attention to yourselves? I mean, she could have opened up, and we might not have known about it until the next day, but when you cause this kind of commotion, we're going to take action. Gabrielle Ellison is the owner of Big Daddy Zane's, and she had actually posted on Facebook before opening an event called Bars and Bartenders Standing United, which featured a photo of guys with guns posing at an undisclosed location. The post said, quote, "They will be here to help protect our rights as a small business owner to open and be able to feed our families." Well, again, that doesn't sound like this was bar security necessarily. In fact, again, I'm unclear as to why there needed to be armed protesters there at all. Again, if you're going to do this, make sure that what you're doing is legal. But I think you also have to consider the tactics that are being used. And in this case, I think the tactics on the part of the sheriff were way overhanded. Not only, again, in making arrests rather than trying to de-escalate and defuse the situation, but, again, bringing out the SWAT team in the first place. Seems like an overreaction, particularly given the fact that the sheriff said, hey, if the bar owner had been low-key, okay, well, it works both ways, right? The bar owner could have been low-key, didn't have to publicize this on Facebook, didn't have to try to turn this into a media event. But the sheriff could have been low-key as well. I look at this, and I'm not trying to, throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I look at this, and I see mistakes that were made on both sides. Now, Archibald says they're going to continue this case in court. He says that is where you take political fights. He says, I'm working with some constitutional lawyers. We've got some big names behind us, and we're going to fight this. He said, we're going to fight it the way regular people fight it in the court, because that's where political battles are won. All right. And he's right about that. That is where these battles should be fought. But again, I think folks on both sides of this issue need to think about the tactics that they are deploying in the battles that they are fighting as well. And I do want to mention as well that the sheriff there in Ector County said, look, he reiterated during Tuesday's press conference, he said, this is not about the Second Amendment. He said, I am a supporter of the Second Amendment. He said, if Governor Abbott or the president or anybody else came to me and said, hey, go round up people's guns, he said, I wouldn't do it. He said, but that's not what this is about. Agree or disagree, that again is what the sheriff had to say. All right, let's get to our armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, our recidivist report. We'll start there. Louisville, Kentucky. I've talked a lot on this program about the early release of inmates who are currently behind bars, and they're being let loose early because of the coronavirus and the attempt to prevent or mitigate the spread of the coronavirus behind bars. There's another aspect to this. There's also the aspect of people who aren't going to jail in the first place because of attempts to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus behind bars. And in Louisville, Kentucky, there has been a juvenile crime spike over the past couple of months. In fact, shootings are about double what they were this time last year, according to authorities. And the Louisville Courier-Journal, actually this is from a WDRB in Louisville, Kentucky. They talked with the mom of a young man who was murdered. 17-year-old Chris Ward died in a drug deal back on April 23rd. And his mom, Kaya Barnes, said that she had been having trouble with her son. Said when the pandemic started, Chris just went out of control. She said he was coming and going wherever he wanted. It was too much for the house. She said he was smoking weed, ignoring the home detention order that he was under. And she actually reached out to her son's probation officer and said, my son is violating probation. He is out of control. Can you please do something? And the response that she got was, quote, because of what was going on with the coronavirus, that they, quote, could not take him to detention, couldn't take him to juvenile detention. This is, again, something that needs to be discussed and is not really being talked about. When you have moms of troubled kids who are asking for help, say, listen, I can't control my son. He's 17 years old. He's doing what he wants. I can't keep him home. He's violating the law. I'm telling you, he's violating the law. Can you please do something about it? And the response is no. And then a tragedy like this ensues and a life is lost when it could have been saved had the state actually performed its obligations and taken this young man back into custody for violating the terms of his probation, kept him in juvenile detention. He would not have been out on the streets. He would not have been breaking the law, and probably be alive today. He might have the sniffles. There's a small chance that he would have come down with serious complications from the coronavirus. But the odds of him surviving would have been much better had he actually been behind bars instead of being out on the streets. So as we, again, talk about public safety, we talk about mitigating the spread of the coronavirus, we also need to talk about mitigating the spread of violent crime. And if people feel like they can get away with these crimes, what is going to happen? They will try to do so. They will continue to engage in this type of behavior. So again, I know there are no easy answers for law enforcement, but when a mom reaches out and says, my son is breaking the law, you need to do something to stop him, you would hope and expect that the state would actually listen. All right, let's get to our armed citizen story of the day from Fayetteville, North Carolina. Police investigating a shooting death at a Fayetteville home. They have investigated at least enough to determine that the homeowner will not be facing any charges in this shooting. Apparently, this all went down May 3rd, late in the evening, May 3rd, around 11 p.m. Police officers were called out to a home on Habersham Drive. Several residents have reported that an adult male was yelling aggressively and banging on homes in the neighborhood. That according to Fayetteville Police Department spokesperson Anne-Marie Burdett, who said at one point the subject reportedly attempted to gain entry to a home there and he was shot by a resident of that home. Police say when they arrived on the scene, subject was found deceased on the back porch of the home. No charges are anticipated in the case, which is still under investigation. But again, it appears as if that individual trying to gain entry into multiple homes, when he tried to gain entry into that last home, the armed homeowner shot in self-defense. Finally, our good deed of the day from Syracuse, New York, where a couple of police officers saved a woman's life, a woman in distress. That's the overpass where the woman was standing the other day, threatening to take her life. And WSYR TV in Syracuse says that Officer James Pastorello and Joseph Talone responded to this emotional distress call over on an overpass over Interstate 81. The female in question, standing on the bridge over the ledge, about to fall into traffic. There was a high chain link fence there on the overpass, so the officers couldn't get directly to her. Officers Pastorello and Talone grabbed the woman through the fence, held onto her until the Syracuse Fire Department actually arrived, set up a ladder on the highway to get the woman down safely. She was taken to a local hospital for treatment. City of Syracuse Police Department commending Officers Pastorello and Talone on their Facebook page, and rightly so, in the right place at the right time to save a woman's life. We thank these officers for their very good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program as always. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest Second Amendment news and information from all around the nation. But don't forget to check out bearingarms.com throughout the day, as well as subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube or the Bearing Arms Cam & Company podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, SoundCloud, all of the major podcast platforms, just like Gabby Hoffman's podcast as well. Until we talk again, be safe, be well, be free, and we'll see you soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company.